folks, let's get started. Welcome, John. Thanks a lot for accepting my, invitation. I'm really a fan,
Yeah.
and I really wanted to have you in a webinar.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Let's start with intro. So I will just make a very short one. So my name is Serhat Can. So I'm one of the co-founders of Resmo. So the name comes from resource monitoring. What we do is we scan all your cloud provider, cloud accounts like AWS, GCP, as well as SaaS tools like Webflow, Slack, Google Workspace, literally anything. We have about 70 plus integrations, and we consolidate all your assets and make sure that everything in your environments are secure. So that's a very simple intro on Resmo, but obviously if you have any questions, we can always talk. So John, I'd like to know more about you. Our attendees would like to know more about you, so the floor is yours.
Sure. Do I get to ask you questions too, by the way?
Of course, I mean, if you want to, but I'm not ready. So.
Yeah. Hey, I'm John Agan. I run developer relations at Webflow. I'm 44 this year, which is crazy to think, but I've been in tech for 25 years. The first 15 years of my career was like classic engineering to engineering leader, engineering manager, and then I did consulting, and I did my own startup a couple of times. A lot of great experiences, but the last 10 years of my career have been very much focused around developer platform. This has been like third-party APIs, partnerships, growing a business through ecosystem. I love it. So that's what I do at Webflow today. Specifically at Webflow, the role is called developer relations, but it's actually pretty broad. We were talking about this before this started, but like the role is very different at different companies. So just to kind of touch on some of the companies I worked at recently Salesforce, GitHub, Slack, Twitch, and then Atlassian. And each of those do them differently, but they are different, or like depending on what your org you're in, or depending on what the goals are of that org, it depends on kind of what the role is. But in my experience in the role, there's generally two huge buckets of like DevRel, DevX, things that are like developer facing to grow. And it's like, is your job to just get the word out there and just like get developers, like just almost like a sales type of role to developers. And that's generally a function of my role, but I actually lean more towards companies that want to do the best, build the best APIs for developers, bring that feedback in, consider them in the roadmap, make sure they have a table, developers have a seat at the table for when we're building new features. Really thinking through like what is the best developer flows. So that's really where I spend a lot of my time, and I really refined that at Slack. I spent almost 6 years at Slack, where we had Hubot when I first started, and that was the only bot that was out there, and we would constantly think like, what would it look like to do like payroll in Slack, or what would it look like to do, approve a time card in Slack, or CRM in Slack. So we would iterate on these things and work with partners and grow. So yeah, so from there, worked with multiple companies, and it's been awesome. At Webflow, we are, if folks don't know what Webflow is, it's a website. You could use like a no-code website tool, and you build like a modern website out of it. What's great about Webflow is everyone is a developer at some level. So what's different about this role versus the other roles I've had is usually I'm like, hey, we've got an API and let's go get developers to build on the APIs. But here we have an opportunity of someone who has like never really done code before, and they're kind of learning how to write code. They might write their first little bit of JavaScript or whatnot. And you could actually teach them all the way to like building their first app and calling an API and using OAuth and things like that. So it's been a pretty exciting journey. I'm about to hit a year, I think next week or so. So it's been great.
Amazing. I mean, congrats on your anniversary. Just to give folks a bit of background, so we met when John was at Slack, and I remember your team was amazing.
Thank you.
A lot of folks took on great jobs after Slack. I remember, the folks there, and so I was at Opsgenie back in the days. We were building that Slack app. We were in this Slack's community channel, and we were really, talking with you guys directly, asking questions, basically building together. So we built the app, we featured it on Slack Marketplace. That got a lot of attention to Opsgenie, so that helped us a lot. So that's actually when I started, learning more about that evangelism, developer relations type of job. So really, I mean, in a way, your team also inspired me to move on to this area.
Wow, I love hearing that. Thank you. Our team at Slack was just, I mean, just amazing team. I never really had like a partner engineering, like that was like kind of a new concept, but I see it all the time now. So that's another one that I talk to folks all the time that are in this like partner engineering type of role or this like field engineering type of role. And I don't know, I feel like Slack just really grew a whole different perspective on working with developers and building a platform. And I don't know, it's been awesome for sure. I'm glad to hear it inspired you as well.
Yeah, I mean, it did. And I really enjoyed our interaction back in the day. So the Webflow piece, really one of my favorite apps. We use it all the time. I have multiple websites built using Webflow. So
Awesome.
really great work on that front as well.
Thank you.
So you mentioned your role was different at different companies. So what I want to know before we start with the questions I have. So I usually ask questions I'm curious about related to the topic. If you have any questions, folks, if you use Q&A, so I'm monitoring that. So I will ask the question. Usually right away, if it's relevant, obviously. But again, feel free to use the Q&A. So I forgot to open the chat, so let me also open the chat for everyone. So if you have any questions, you can always chat with us as well. So so it's on right now. Yes. All right. So you mentioned that it's a different role in different companies. So what I want to understand, especially in big companies, so it's usually not just about just going out there, like speaking at conferences or just being a public figure it's more about you have a community already, like developers, or not just developers, customer using this product. So there's some traction, but you want to you want to enable those customers to build apps or whatever, like even businesses on top of your company's business. So integrate better in a way. So how is that different? I mean, you've seen both roles, so I'm curious about that before we start.
Yeah, it's so different. I almost dug into it in the intro, and I figured you would want to dive into specifics, so I kind of backed off it. But it's very different everywhere. I will say this: I've kind of learned some principles over the years that I stick to, and number one for me is the developers first. Like the whole company is thinking about the business and the goals and things like that. And I always tell them, for myself and for my team, I'm like, the developers first. Ground all your decisions on developer empathy. If you do right by the developer, everything else will work itself out. So that's the first thing I'll say is like all my team and anyone I work with directly, like under me, is generally grounded on developer needs first. And in doing so, I feel very strongly that you can't really empathize with a developer unless you are technical. Like, you don't have to be an engineer, but like you need to be able to walk through a developer flow and understand, hey, yeah, it's 3 APIs, it's documented, but it doesn't mean it makes sense to call those 3 APIs in this order, or hey, this actually feels really weird. Like, so you have to feel that pain to really understand what it takes there. So those are kind of like at least two pieces that I feel very strongly about. From the third, I would say, is a leadership perspective, which is I always present myself and my team as like the voice of the developer internally and the voice of the platform externally. And a lot of times you'll hear in DevRel, which is mostly the voice of the platform externally, which is very much like an outward motion. But the inward motion, like the feedback loop, is also pretty important to me as well. Like making sure that developers' needs are heard in roadmap reviews, making sure these like nuanced paper cuts and ergonomic, improvements are prioritized in the bigger roadmap discussions. Just talking through things with engineers as they're building it to make sure that developers' inputs heard there, bringing specific developers to internally to talk to our developers to walk through their use case. These are all like really important parts of it. So that's just to say like kind of my mental framing. Now back to your question of like, how is it different everywhere? It's interesting. When I was at GitHub, our primary function of interacting with developers was through the sales org. So that's the group I was running. While it was a sales function, it was still very much grounded in like getting the developers what they need, unlocking them. Obviously, developers, you sell to developers at GitHub. So that was like kind of my first like go big on developers and go out of your way to like build a product for developers. But the difference is it's like it's a sales cycle. So once the sale is over, the priority, I wouldn't say it goes away, but it's like reduced.
Yep.
Where Slack was amazing because Slack was very like Stuart from the very beginning was like, we need to take care of our developers. And Stuart didn't just say, take care of big logo. There's these 1-2 person shops that were growing with Slack that he would have, prioritization, say, hey, no, we need to take care of this use case. We can't let this go. So I think that's a big win for Slack is like they thought about the whole spectrum of developers, not just big logo and not just, the other side of it. And I can dive deeper into any of these as you'd like. At Twitch, it was games. I have never done like consumer. I had never done games before. And I'm a gamer. So it was awesome to go there. The thing with Twitch, though, is we had extensions was the big thing we were pushing there. And the developer experience org at Twitch was about 150 people. And for context, I think GitHub, my team was 40-ish, something like that. And
Wow.
at Slack, it was about 5 or 6, but it was just like all heavy hitters at Slack. So it's just kind of like a mix of folks. But at Twitch, it was, I didn't run DX. I was a portion of DX and it was about 150 folks. And my role ended up switching about 3 months into running product engineering, program management for third-party APIs, identity, which should probably hit home for you, a little bit of like fraud, privacy type stuff. And I got really, like it was an awesome job and Twitch is awesome, but I got really removed from the developer needs. So I ended up like going to Atlassian and this was also during COVID. So there's like a lot of weirdness happening there, but Atlassian was very indexed on, there's a new cloud platform. Atlassian historically been a server-based platform, and they're moving to cloud, and they wanted to like really go big on developers there, and kind of rebuilding that trust that felt fragile, I would say, or brittle as the server to cloud transformation was happening. So a lot of that work was mostly community, quite honestly. Like, every big company uses Jira at some, way, shape, or form, it seems like. So really Atlassian's focus was like, we need to make sure the community trusts us. They can go along to this journey with us. So we spent a lot of time just trying to, meet the community needs and make sure everyone still, can keep business going as usual and ideally grow in the new cloud world. And that was a lot of the focus there.
I mean, my 2 cents on that, like, I mean, so I was at Atlassian together with John at the time. I remember, so there are billion-dollar companies, apps built on top of Atlassian platform, and they were really rushing into moving their apps to cloud because, on-prem wasn't going to be forever. So I remember it was a big bet and it required a lot of work on the developer side because literally, I mean, $100 million companies, a lot of $100 million companies, even billion-dollar ones, it's just they use Atlassian APIs. And it was on-prem and it's going to cloud. It's all the development experience is different. They have to run their apps now. They weren't before. So I remember the developer experience was very critical. For them to be able to move to cloud smoothly.
That's right. I just thought about it. I think I've jumped into it making some assumptions that we know the difference between like cloud community and like the different types of developers. So it might help to at least share my mental model of how like I interact with the broader audience. So in my current role today, and actually this is a framework I've followed generally, is like as I mentioned in the beginning, like I see DevX, DevRel, any type of like outward developer motion is like kind of a two phase thing. It's like there's a, hey, let's go get developers, and hey, let's take care of developers and bring their input in. So if you've ever worked in this world, this goes back to my empathy, like you got to know it. Like those are very hard context shifts to like, hey, let's go push and get new developers. And oh, someone's asking for help. I need to help them. I need to go deep on this like bug and figure out where it is. So I purposely segment these two areas as like inbound, outbound. And in the case of I'll use Webflow since that's my current model is we have partners. So I have partner engineering under me, which represents like peer SaaS companies. So these are like brand name logos, AWS or HubSpot or whatnot. When you work with them and you want to do like a strategic type of, partnership with them, you're not going to say, hey, go read the docs and good luck. Let us know how it works out. You're like, hey, we'll sit down with you and let's figure out all the nuance. And in some cases, you need to do something special for them, or you could get them early access or whatever. So partner engineering is focused on that very much one-to-one partnership type of developer. Still the developer persona, but it's just a developer in one of these pure SaaS companies. And it's generally managed by like a BD team or something like that. Community, in my experience, is generally managed by marketing, like dev marketing or whatnot. And in the advocacy role, which generally under DevRel would focus on that group. And that's kind of the same as the one-to-one, except it's a one-to-many. It's the same messaging, but it's something tailored towards like a broader audience. And these are generally folks that move faster than the big companies, right? These are folks that might be a little bit more invested in your platform than some of those others. So when you have a new feature or you need to get feedback or you need to iterate on like an innovative idea, these folks usually move faster. They're a little bit more invested. You could kind of spar on these like ideas with them a little faster. So I bucket that group as community. So when we talk about communities, I think of like the one-to-many group there. And just to kind of close the loop on that, the other two functions I think of are content. So content I see as, so the first two I mentioned, they're very much like, I have folks, let's go out there and let's get developers, let's motivate them. Content is self-serve. It's like, hey, we don't know you exist, or you just want to figure it out on your own, or you could be big, you could be little, whatever, but you need to have the content. I mean, I think just as well as anyone else, like if your docs are terrible, it's just not going to work out. So you got to have solid docs. You got to have like good guidance, sample code. I bucket that under there. Sometimes tooling is a separate bucket depending on the type of platform, but it's still a type of content. And then finally, I think of like a bucket that looks like, I call it developer success today. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but it's really it's not really like a help desk, but it's more like somebody they're in the marketplace, or they're a successful developer in our ecosystem. And there's like this nuanced thing that maybe, that they're encountering, and it's probably a little out of the scope for like a general help desk team, but that we work close enough with them that we can kind of go deep and solve it. And that's what I think of those roles are. So long-winded to say, those are kind of my framework for working with them.
Yeah, I mean, those resonate with me a lot. So a few things to add on my side. So I work with a lot of AWS folks. So I was deep on AWS, so I'm an AWS hero. So I get to know a lot of AWS folks. So they have two types of DevRel there. Like one is just focus on building internal tooling, work closely with partners, with developers. The other one is more customer facing. They usually call those folks evangelists. They do go out there, just put content, but they do it like an outside developer perspective and write a lot of blog posts, not documentation mostly, but blog posts. And they do live streams, they do webinars. Basically, they do everything to get the word out there. So they separate those two roles within the same org. So that's, I think, a good way to what you said. I mean, to put on paper. At that scale, it makes sense, I guess. Definitely doing that.
Yeah. I'll throw a wild card at you in that scenario. And I usually hear it on the Stripe scenario, which is like, I always try to level set of like, AWS is the same bucket as like their primary user. The person they are selling to is a developer.
Yeah.
Stripe is the same boat. or you know, these like Twilio is another good example of like they are everything they do. Everyone in the company is indexed on a developer. So that's always a different model
Mm-hmm.
when versus like a company who has like a core product that isn't selling to a developer persona that's writing code and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where just a portion of that business is like we need to increase the business or unlock features via the platform and developers. So it's always like a different model. And I think AWS is kind of is the big version of that, where like they're a
Yeah.
massive beast of a company and they're all developer focused, you know?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so so I was a software engineer in Opsgenie back in the days, and then we we were seeing, a lot of folks, developer background folks, getting evangelist titles or developer relations type of titles, going out there telling about their tools. We were competing with tools like PagerDuty, VictorOps, and they had evangelists. So we figured, so I was, kind of willing to do it. I wanted to just travel around the world
Yeah.
and give conference talks, write content. So I was already enjoying that and organize conferences and doing basic everything. I mean, outside customer face, not just customer facing, outside. In our case, DevOps engineers, were our target market. So they're a bit
Yep.
different than developers. So they didn't write a lot of code, or I didn't have to write a lot of code in many cases. But we framed my role, in three different um, titles. So we call it like three C's. So code, content, and community. So I was supposed to focus on all of them at once, but in every quarter I usually focused on one more than others. So for example, we were starting, one of the problems with smaller companies. Uh, Overall, I think this is a big problem, but if you want to market your APIs, or market to developers, somehow technical folks, you have to have the knowledge, and often marketing teams don't have that kind of like deep knowledge to be able to actually communicate those API kind of like technical stuff. So
Yep.
that might not be the case in some cases, but usually that's the case. So there has to be somewhat like technical folks helping them to get the word out there. So I was that person within the marketing team. So I was part of the marketing team. I was helping them understand the product, as well as writing content for them. So they were reviewing, basically changing my content, but I mean, so I was giving them the fundamentals. So that that's why what you said resonates me a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
You know
so
what else is interesting?
mhm.
Oh, sorry, please.
Sorry, you don't know. Go ahead. I was saying.
I was gonna say what else is interesting to piggyback on that is developers are you don't market to developers like normal marketing. Like developers don't fall for drip campaign like standard drip campaigns or these like newsletters things. Like developers want real talk. You know, they want another technical person to interact with. So it's a very different marketing motion, and you know companies know this, so that's why they don't try to market to developers the same way, which is why they'll leverage like a devrel team or an advocacy team or evangelist team.
Mhm.
Another thing to I guess people don't realize is like why would this one segment of audience you'd have this completely different marketing motion for it. And it's like developers are very powerful in companies. There's so much bottoms up technology wise, like bringing tools in and getting companies to pay for developer tools or things, productivity tools, things like that. Developers have a lot of power. It's generally not the CIO or the CTO or the VP of
Mhm.
engineering bringing in tools. It's usually a bottoms up motion, and like companies know this. So it's like it's very it's I don't know, it's an awesome space to be in for sure.
That's a good point. That's why a lot of companies, they try to put DevRel under sales, which doesn't usually work. But that's how you sell to developers, right? I mean,
Yeah,
the
for
content
sure,
has
for
to be
sure.
real. People, has to actually be. I mean, put useful content out there. So that's a good point. So
Yeah.
related to that, we talked about a lot of things related to DevRel evangelism already. So I wonder. So you have you have customers in your product already, but to be able to actually build a successful API, build a successful platform, you need to, foster that community engagement and bring people together. So what are the ways to do it? I mean, you've done it multiple times. What are the ways to foster community engagement?
I believe very much in like no BS, just build trust with the developers. So I'll tell you, Webflow, like when I joined, we didn't know who our developers. I mean, we know like the Webflow core folks, like some of our partners in that regard, but folks that are using the API and building like data type of integrations, things like that, we didn't have as much clarity. Like we had signals, but not clarity. So I spent a lot of time just reviewing data, looking at how tokens are being used, customers using it, the apps that are using, what APIs they're calling. Then I would try their apps out, and then I would like talk to them. I would, set up, first of all, I guess number one is I love people. That's like my favorite part of my job. So any chance I get to like meet someone, talk to someone, even if they're mad at me, I still like talking to them for whatever reason. I love to talk to people. And so like reaching out to developers, I would just go down the list and say, hey, can we set up time? And they're always like, in the case of Webflow, they're like, yeah, we'd love to talk. We didn't know that y'all thought about us. And I was like, oh, no, we're definitely thinking about you. And I would like talk to them, and it would be generally great energy. Like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Like at first I never heard anything negative, and I'm like, don't you have a wish list, or is there anything? And they're like, oh, well, there is this one little thing here and there, whatever. So I would take that feedback in, and I would just make sure to have like a really closed loop with those folks and just let them know what's going on with it. So that's, I think it's really communication and building trust. And I think a big part of trust in my role, which I think is kind of an unpopular view, but I stand by it very strongly, which is like, if something's not ready or if it's not great, I'm not going to tell them, hey, try it out and let me know. I'm going to be honest with them, say, hey, like, it's here if you want to try it, but I'm not sure if this is ready for you or whatnot. And I think that helps build trust. And, they're building businesses, and they don't want to, there's only got so many resources to put towards a thing. So if they know that, hey, maybe this is not ready or it's not the right time to look into this, I think they appreciate that honesty. And then in turn, when it is ready and I let them know, they trust me to say, okay, this is the time to go big on it. So I think it's a lot of communication. I know we're in this like post-COVID Zoom and Slack for everything, but I really love the in-person. I love talking to folks where possible. At Slack, we used to go on site for like a week and just like whiteboard out scenarios and align up like even with small developers, but big developers as well. So yeah, I don't know. I really believe in the connection, talking to folks, just aligning on, hey, these are our goals, those are your goals. Let's see where they meet. And like keeping a closed loop on it is really what I believe in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can definitely resonate. I mean, if I'm building something with a big company, the reason, I mean, I really want to, see it last because I'm investing. That's why I chose that big vendor. So that makes sense to me a lot.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you look at data a lot. So what kind of, I mean, like success metrics you look at? Like if you are, what kind of metrics do you use to measure the success of your, developers' success? Let's say.
Yeah, I full disclosure, I love data. I ran a data group at one time. I geek out on data. I like ETL. I like these like weird things. So anytime someone gives me access to like run queries, I'm like a kid in the candy store. Yeah, so I think about this. It's different everywhere. I guess I'll start with that. It's generally based on like what does the company want to do. It's not always, you're not always ready for more developers, so I'll start with that. Like a lot of people are just like, oh, how do you get more developers? Go do whatever. You're not always ready for them. You might have a new thing that you don't want to bring people to the old thing yet until the new one comes out. So I'll just like preface with that. But the way I generally think about like a developer metrics are in a developer funnel, which is usually in partnership with product and marketing. And like my loose framework, right? Like everywhere is different, so don't hold me to this, but like loosely, I'm like, there's a awareness bucket. Folks is like, hey, do you even know you exist? There's an interested bucket, which is, hey, this is actually kind of looks like something I might be wanting to do. That might come in through docs. Like the awareness might come in through like a meetup or marketing or something like that, where the interested might come in through docs, or they're reading, reference material or a sample app or something like that. Then the next phase of the funnel would be building. There's writing code, they're making API calls. And then, from there, did they actually make it to like a published state where they're distributing it either internal or like in a marketplace, that type of thing. From there, it's like, who's using it? Like, is there adoption? What are the adoption metrics around it? Is it a successful adoption? Are people uninstalling it afterwards? Or is it actually staying on there? Of the top customers, how many of them have it installed? That type of thing. And then, of course, the grand prize is like, are they making money? Is there any type of monetization for it? Does that like really drive is it really solving a customer need enough to where they would pay for it? So each of those have like sub metrics. I can dive into like, I'll just touch on a few of them. Like things, I actually just wrote some notes here. So things that like around awareness would be like, if you had an event and like who attended the event, or how many views to a blog post, or if you had an email, how many people click through the email, that type of thing. Interested is always an interesting one because it's harder to measure on the doc site, but you usually try to have like something that drives them to like hey, get started on your first app, and then they click into that and they go through it. And if they read through it and they click through that and they like create a token or they build an app from there, that's usually a pretty good sign that they're interested. Then from there, you can kind of say, okay, are they calling APIs? What APIs are they calling? Have they issued tickets? Are they interacting with the community? Are they asking questions? That type of thing. Publish is, easier. Those start getting to be a little bit vanity. It's like a number of apps in a marketplace, or, reviews of it, or, how many of those are like pure SaaS companies versus community, that type of thing. Used as like number of times it's installed, number of, resources. Like for us, it's sites that it's been installed on. In the Slack case, it was like workspaces, that type of thing. Of those, how many users in that resource is actually using it, and monetization is money. Now, the thing that's not reflected here that I also measure are like what I call friction metrics, which are things that, the people that are struggling in this process somewhere along the lines, right? Like you created a token and you actually haven't used it in 30 days, or you maybe you built an app and you're really active, but you never made it to a published state, or your APIs are just your API calls are constantly getting like 400s or whatever. There's just like error calls in that. So there's like a lot of friction metrics that you could look into and start saying like, hey, there might be something here that we can help them out with. Are their tickets not getting answered? Have they asked for help and no one's helping them? These are like friction metrics that I feel like are very actionable that can help people over the line.
Yep. So do you really, I mean, in those cases, do you reach out to those people directly and ask them why that happened? Okay. That's actually, I love that. So that's, to me, even so, we are a very small startup at Resmo still. I mean, like 14 people. And what we learned at Opsgenie, basically monitor everything. There are a lot of data.
Yeah.
I mean, so back in the days, we were using New Relic for literally like recording every transaction happening across Opsgenie's backend, literally everything. And that had that helped us ask a lot of different questions. And right now we are also doing it. I was just talking with my co-founder. So we are using, an internal like thing. So he said we recorded 1 terabyte of trace last 10 days. For basically recording everything related to, I mean, every HTTP call, literally everything. So obviously we don't keep data for a long time, but if we have a question, we should be able to ask and get an answer. So if something is wrong. That's right. That's really important.
Plus having an idea of thresholds and knowing when things are spiking or going down and things like that. Yeah, I very much believe. I thought I knew it really well until I worked at Twitch, and Twitch just had these astronomical numbers that you work with. Well, not astronomical, but very large numbers on the consumer side. And it was during COVID, so it was like very high activity on top of that. And it was just like, I just learned a lot from just daily monitoring of just basic metrics will tell you so much if you just kind of see a trend of it,
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, even if you are not doing anything, you have to invest in monitoring. Otherwise, you are just blind. So that's a big takeaway on my side as well. So the relevant. So we talked about documentation a bit, but I want to dig deeper because that's super, super important. But developers don't like writing documentation. So
Yeah,
someone usually has to do it. Like, I mean, at least even if they like writing documentation, there will be a stream of like changes coming from different developers, and there will be one documentation. So the language has to be somewhat similar across documentation. So, someone at least has to review, but usually developers don't write the documentation directly. They just write like the fill out and like, these are the changes, these are what you need to do type of like document. Then someone talks with them, reviews those documents and write documentation. In relatively big companies, in our case, we also even like a small company, someone from our marketing team, every change goes to production. They're written in a Slack channel, and then that person, when writing the change log, talk with the developer and immediately starts writing the documentation, so we can make the necessary updates. But
yeah,
on the developer side, that can be a bit different. It is some things can be automated actually, but some things cannot.
that's right.
So and at scale, I can't imagine like how to manage that. And documentation, as you said, is one of the biggest things. So how do you
Yeah.
make that happen?
It's very hard. First of all, I'll just start with that. I'll
Mm-hmm.
tell you how I think about it. First of all, I hate the word documentation. When I talk about it inside of the work, externally, of course, I say documentation,
Yeah.
but internally, it's too vague. Especially when you talk about the developer audience. So I think about more specific ways of addressing this. So first, there's like what I call reference material, which is like what is the API endpoints? What are the payloads, the parameters, the headers, the response, blah blah blah. These are just like very binary type of documentation
Mm-hmm.
reference
Yep.
material, and I index on OpenAPI to make those and to make those as accurate as possible. There's so many tools around OpenAI that OpenAPI that to generate like documentation around it and to kind of formalize and to do testing and things like that. So for that, that's kind of by the way, it's like used to be called Swagger if you're not familiar with it. So
Yep.
that's kind of my for that part of it. I feel like that engineers could own that part of it. As they're writing the
I
API, they
agree.
could update the spec as well. That's not always the case,
Yep.
but at the same time, of all the things, that's not the worst in the world. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one bucket, and that's generally like just being able to know the contract of the API.
Mm-hmm.
The other is, okay, well, how do I use the API? Which I kind of bucket into more like guides.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm going to keep pointing back to is like, I believe very much in empathy. So I feel like this is not the person that wrote the API that should be writing
Mm-hmm.
this. This should be somebody that's stepping through this with a fresh lens, a fresh view on it and saying, does this make sense? How does this feel about it? They
Mm-hmm.
generally have writing experience, but they don't have to be a technical writer. In fact,
Yep.
I rarely hire technical writers for this type of role. It's just more, tech savvy, can figure things out. Because I kind of feel like that's the audience, right? Like you don't want
Mm-hmm.
somebody that's an expert. You don't want somebody who doesn't know. Like you need someone in the middle, and you don't want someone too focused on the writing. You want someone focused on like, does this thing make sense? Like, can I walk
Mm-hmm.
through it? Where did I get stuck that I need to document that I need to help someone else go through it? So I think that's a portion of it. And then there's I need to code this thing and make sure the code works. And like, it'd be nice as the engineers, you always like to look at code. And like, personally, I always start with the code and then I back into the docs and like, okay, what the heck was going on over here? So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what my mental model is. So I always like to have like some type of code counterpart with it, even if it's like a hello world or whatnot, but ideally it's something a little bit more elaborate. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's the scale question, which is like, how do you do a lot of this? And I think Atlassian really taught me a lot in this bucket because we, I think 7,000 person company at the time that I left. And, content there is very challenging because there's so many product teams. So, like you can't keep up with the things that's happening, and you're not going to hire enough writers to write all the things that's happening. So the best thing you can do is build programs rather than resourcing it. And ideally, you have a program that's like, here's how we consistently deliver content to our developers. It has these pieces. These are the ways that we check for it. These are the things that we need to, how we measure it, whatever your checkboxes are. And you have folks that kind of run the program. And, for things that are critical or time sensitive, they can jump in and contribute to whatever piece of it they need to. But generally, they're more program oriented more so than technical writing oriented, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, at that scales, for sure. I mean, things has to be different. So there's a question in the Q&A section. So it's a bit of a generic question, but Batuhan, if you have if you want to add anything specific, you can elaborate more on this. So Batuhan says, "Hey John, I'm wondering if there are days with major incidents, crisis in DevRel space. What could be a bad day for a DevRel organization? Is there anything DevRel organizations doing to prevent those days happening?"
Yes. If a developer's having a bad day, DevRel's having a bad day. And if DevRel's not having a bad day, then I would be upset with DevRel. I've just never experienced that. I mean, if developers are having a bad day, so are DevRel. And it's generally hey, this API contract broke. Like, I think that's probably the most common. It's like, hey, I used to call this 100, for years, and now it's not working anymore, or something's changing. There's an outage, some nuance around that. And generally, DevRel, they usually, in a lot of cases, there's a connection with DevRel already, so they just kind of reach out to us via the community or some ticket or whatnot, and then we try to go and help out, like solve the problem. So we kind of proxy it, and then we communicate, hey, this is what's going on with it, or hey, this has changed. Ideally, you're giving them the heads up before it's changed. But usually something that's breaking the third party's business is usually the thing that hurts DevRel the most. I have a bad example, but I have a bad analogy I use for how I think about dealing with those are, I always like to use money things because money always resonates with people. So if you were to call your bank and if you have money missing from your bank account and you weren't expecting it, and you call your bank and they're like, they leave you on hold for hours and you can't talk to anybody. You talk to someone, they're like, yeah, that's how it is. Deal with it. You'd say, I hate that bank. I'm not going to work with them. Or like, this is ridiculous, But if you called someone and someone answered, relatively soon, and they're like, oh, this is bad. Let me look into this for you. And this doesn't look right. Let me see what I can do for you. And hey, this might take me a little while to figure out. Blah, 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 let me check on it. And then maybe they call you back the next day and you don't have your money back, but they got back to you and they say, hey, I'm still looking into this thing for you. It's still a problem for us. We're looking into it. You don't have your money, so the problem still exists, but at least you have some sense of trust and confidence that your problem will get resolved. And that's very much how I feel like DevRel's role is in those areas, which is to keep the trust, keep the communication alive, let folks know that we're taking it very seriously. We're here if you want to talk through some nuance issue. Sometimes their customer wants to hear it from us because, if we're the ones that are experiencing the problem, then, the customer, it's not their problem. So there's just a lot of that I very much believe in. And that's kind of the DevRel stress, is just making sure the developer is feeling trusted in the platform and the work that's happening.
So I have a question relevant. So it's going to be a bit different, but so you mentioned there are two sides, like looking internally and externally. So what I see in some companies, especially during, economic crisis like this, DevRel folks can be the first ones to go. In some companies, I feel like they if they are not connected to a major sales, marketing, either product or some sort of main vein of the company, or they don't really, let's say, contribute to the money directly somehow. they cannot show their real value in some cases, especially the external facing folks, because sometimes the metrics are to measure, especially again external folks. So how do you so obviously it's very different company to company, but what do you think about that? Let's make it general.
Well, first of all, very true statement. I mean, wow, the last few months have just been crazy. Like DevRel folks have been getting laid off left and right. I am not a very public person, but I'm available for folks. I usually do internal type of conversation with companies. It's rarely external. But lately, my LinkedIn has just been flooded with folks that are like, hey, I know this person. Can you talk to this person? Or they just reach out to me directly. So I've been trying to help as much as I can. So this question actually comes up a lot lately, and it's painful. It kind of goes back into like the goals of the company and organizationally where DevRel is sitting and all those pieces. My unofficial read on it is it feels like the marketing heavy, hey, let's just go get more developers type of folks is one bucket of folks that seem to have taken a hit recently. And the other bucket are, which was kind of said to me, I haven't validated this, but it kind of feels a little bit true, is like, there's been this consolidation of like pre and post sales, or like trying to like consolidate like these functions that are maybe too broken up. And in those worlds, if you're like developer facing, like maybe a field engineering type of role or something, that sometimes you have more of those resources than maybe your new organizational goals align with. So those are hard. I don't know how to stay protected in that scenario. My general approach, kind of as we started this conversation, is like, I feel like today I'm under the product org. I've been under product. I've been under engineering. I've never been under marketing. I love marketing, but it's just, I don't, that's not the kind of DevRel group I want to run. And under product, you are an essential part of the product lifecycle. You have inputs into what we need to build, into the roadmap. The nuanced features of what we're building needs to come from that DevRel team. So everyone can be, everyone's job can go away. So I'm not oblivious to that, but I feel like in the grand scheme of things, we show our value by providing pretty solid input into like what we're building and keeping scope at the right level.
Yeah, I also believe, I mean, especially in your case, the internal facing type of roles, product is the right place, because you actually have to be part of the product team to influence things directly. Otherwise, I mean, if you're in marketing, for an evangelist, it may make sense to be in marketing or sales organization, because that's literally your job. But for in your case, the product is the right place. So because we have 10 minutes, so I don't want to overtime. So I want to ask you about the security piece. So, we are working in, the security area in Resmo. So I usually have to, want to ask at least one thing about security. So security is hard because everyone says it's everyone's job, but if something is everyone's job, it's no one's job, right? So
that's right.
How are you guys involved in security? Are you guys, doing anything directly relevant to security? What are your concerns? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So I'll say this. I always appreciated security, but I was actually in the security org at my final days at Twitch, and wow, so much more respect for security, anyone in the security space. I just there's a whole world that I just didn't realize how difficult and how high stress, but it's one of those things that if it's working, you never know it exists, but if it's broken, the whole, it's just like everything's terrible. Right. So, I have a huge amount of respect for security, and coming into Webflow, that became a core tenet for me, is just things need to be secure early. You need to be thinking about security, bring security in. We have an awesome security team at Webflow also. So it's, I reached out early on saying, hey, as we're building stuff, how can we work closer together to kind of talk through some nuance? And of course I've been around enough where I kind of know some obvious ones, but sometimes you get in these rabbit holes of solutions and you're like, this feels fragile. It feels like there might be a vulnerability here. So that's one part of it, is just kind of looping security in on the ones that I feel like need another set of eyes rather than the obvious. The other are kind of reactive type things where something might happen. It doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be like a major company event type of thing, but it's just like, hey, this is actually a thing that we should look into and make sure this doesn't, get bigger or whatnot. And I think those are really fun and challenging types of things to work through and to like build into the product. So my answer to that is like, I feel like it's essential in the software development lifecycle, for looping security in, for actually building the security. I believe very much in standards. I advocate for using standards where possible. Like all of our APIs, we're trying to build around OAuth 2, and some of the extensions onto OAuth we're looking into building into. Where like today we don't have OAuth scopes. We're adding OAuth scopes. So there's like a lot of these type of things that we are building into our APIs, and of course the product is has a lot of these core tenants involved as well. So I don't know how deep you want to get on it, but that's at least one part of it.
Yeah, I mean that's for me that's enough, because I mean, so the standards are really, I mean, the keyword that I took away from your words here, because that gives you a fundamental way of security, like especially in your context. There are things security can do from outside, like monitoring certain things, educating you guys, in certain things. They can talk with you if they detect something, but otherwise, I mean, they can do certain things on on the way to production. They can help you guys, but it's really, at the end of the day, you have to have that kind of mentality in some ways to to build the foundation, and that the standards really helps. That's super helpful.
You know what I'm anxious to ask you? Again, I'm 44. I've been doing this for 25 years. It's just everywhere I go, OAuth seems to be the most complicated subject for folks, and it's just like I guess I've been doing it so long, it's just second nature. Like I don't even think about it. And every platform uses OAuth, but no matter what it is, internal or external, it's like I feel like I have to teach OAuth over and over and over again. And it's like you can't even get into the nuance of like Pixie or OIDC or things like that. And then on top of that, and mostly this is in the context of like working with developers building on the platform or building their first app. And then as you're like teaching folks these things, you start catching where they're like sharing their tokens in GitHub, or they're sharing a cloud IDE now and it has their token there, or their client secret or things like that. So I spend so much time chasing these things, and that's where and it's not just OAuth. Like it's more than just OAuth. It's data residency, or how you're connecting like multiple systems together, and what data you're passing back and forth. It's just like these things, I feel like no matter how far I've come in my career, I feel like they're always the first thing that I have to like solve in an ecosystem. I don't know if you experience that or not.
I mean, so in our case, so we do have like 70 plus integrations. So, we don't prefer integrating through API keys because it's not the most secure way. So for us, OAuth is the best way. It's more secure. It's, it works well. We can get scopes that we want to in many cases. So that helps us in many ways. I think it's very simple if you figure that out. For, I think it's on developers a bit to, I mean, sometimes some folks, they just, make a big deal out of, everything they don't know, but I don't want to just, blame on on folks, but it's just, it's not that hard. Usually once you figure that out, it's easy. Maybe they haven't encountered it yet, but it kind of, it's easy to understand if you just have a key and make an HTTP request, but OAuth, gives you so much power. If you understand that, if you just implement one time, it just makes it much easier. So
I mean, that's what I think too, but my experience tells me otherwise, and I've tried it so many ways. So
exactly. I mean, no, I agree. I mean, I was on the developer side, and when I first encountered OAuth, I remember saying, I mean, why not API key? It's just much simpler. Because I mean, I didn't have that kind of like context back in the days. Like I was when I was a junior. So I kind
But
of
I will say this,
understand.
when
Yeah.
I teach someone and they actually do it and they send me the link, they're like, look, it works. They're so excited. They're like, this is great. I don't have to like walk people through copy paste and stuff. I'm like, yeah,
Yep.
exactly. It's just like the
Exactly.
right way to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And it makes it exactly. I mean, the thing is, you are also building those integrations. The I mean, the best thing we can do is just make it smooth, just one click.
that's right.
That's what we are trying to do with every integration as well. So one question before we
Sure.
close the session. So just a generic question. So how do you stay up to date with latest trends? So I mean, especially on the front end side. So I mean, there are a lot of new technologies. Obviously, API is just generic REST API type of stuff. They are not changing a lot, but also the standards. I mean, the client apps, the tutorials, they have to change constantly. So I mean, how do you stay up to date?
Well, first of all, I live on YouTube. I love YouTube. And there's I'm not huge on TikTok, but I do appreciate the short form content.
Mhm.
YouTube Shorts, even though not the most popular feature in the world, but like it actually has a lot of great developer snippets. Like I've learned so many like VS Code power ups through that, or like just kind of nuance changes in like TypeScript, but like the latest TypeScript, that type of thing. So YouTube is a big piece of that. I follow a bunch of folks on Twitter who will announce something that they're doing, and it's kind of hard to see like what's hype or what's not. But I try to code every day, and so by coding and trying things out, I kind of learn like what the value is are on things. Daily.dev is a cool website that kind of aggregates a bunch of like trending topics in the community. Front end is just a super hot topic. It's like such a quickly growing. There's so many frameworks constantly changing. It's hard to keep up with. But the thing is if you're familiar with the problems these things are solving, then it starts making sense what these frameworks are doing. And I
Yep.
think the hard part about keeping up with stuff is just knowing what problem a specific framework is targeting to do best.
Mhm.
And it's not always. So I don't know. That's a very long-winded answer to say. I think you got to know the problem better, and then you can kind of
Mhm.
start seeing what solutions are built around that problem. And I think I'm just encountered with the problems so often that
Mhm.
I quickly look at like, hey, how is this thing being solved today? I also worked at GitHub, so I live on GitHub. I love GitHub. I just think it's a
Mhm.
phenomenal product. So there's so much you can learn from GitHub as well. But I don't know.
Yep.
I like coding, just typing out stuff and trying it out and seeing what it like. Just like what you said with OAuth, like I would code it out myself and see, oh, I get it now. Okay, so that's how I try
Yep.
to keep up.
Yep. That's super helpful. And what you said about, like, I mean, if you have the fundamental knowledge, of how things work,
Yeah,
it's kind of very easy to speed up on things. So that's really the key, I guess, on the front end side as well. I mean, if you know why, how something works, that really helps. I mean,
yeah. If you're like, oh, I need to learn front end, should I learn React or should I learn
yeah,
Remix or should whatever? And you're like, well, what are you trying to build? If you can
yeah.
start with that, you can get to your
Mhm.
solution and the options a lot easier. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. It's all great though. I love it.
Yeah. By the way, I mean, coding every day at your level as a manager, that's amazing. That's really, I
I
guess, one of the reasons you are so successful at your job. As far as I believe, that's super.
I have I have worked with people in my field that don't code and they great people, but they just don't understand the problem. They don't understand
Yep.
the detail of the problem. And I just never want to be that person.
Mhm.
Not to take anything away from them because they're amazing folks in their own right, but personally, I just feel like this is my space and I need to understand it firsthand.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's just going to be like words on a paper and it won't hit me the same way,
Yep. And I have the same mentality for, like, at least first level engineering managers. Like, if you are working with an engineering team, a small engineering team, you have to at least, like, somewhat code, certain things to be able to appreciate and understand and work with the engineering folks directly. So that's a
Yeah.
decision to come for the company, of course. That affects a lot of things, but to me, that's really the key to success. I mean, you have to understand your audience deeply.
That's right. And as a leader, you need to know a big problem from a small problem, in my opinion. So sometimes when something comes up in a conversation, you should immediately know, like, oh, that's actually a pretty big problem. And I feel like if you're not close enough to it, then you don't have to like be production level code, but like you need to understand, like, oh, that's actually a, that's actually a pretty big change that we're gonna need. It's a. So anyway, I don't know. I think that's a big part of it as well. It's just kind of understanding what you're signing up for.
Exactly. John, I mean, we passed the time, 1 hour. So we were chatting before. So thanks a lot
Yeah,
for
this was
joining me
awesome. Thank
today.
you.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot. So really great to get your insights on the area, everything relevant to, developer, experience as well. So I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to putting this on YouTube.
awesome.
So again, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you again too.
Thank you, John. Have a great day.
All right, bye.
Bye.